So, where was I?
Trader Hole is the one I mentioned earlier, where you can get items by trading with the Mon in the dungeon, and there are guides for what you can get for the most part available on GameFAQs. It's a pretty extensive list, but requires you to trade 5, 8, and 11 times with Prince Mamemon to access, which requires a total of 45, 72, and 99 keychains beforehand, only 9 of which you can hold at a time. Dungeon of Doom is similarly impossible or pathetically easy, depending on the prep time you put into it. While having already accepted one of the prior quests...
Speaking of, you can do any of the quests as many times as you want, in the event you fail them the first time, or want another reward you haven't gotten yet.
You go to the quest giver, who will tell you of a specific item he wants, with the intent of finding it in the dungeon.
Which is fucking impossible! As said before, the item drop from monsters is pretty much random outside of the signature weapon from the Nume boss rush. So, getting the correct desired item is an exercise in futility.
Sure, some Digimon have higher drop percentages in trends for which item shows up, but it's ultimately a needle in a haystack experience when you're only looking for 1 or 2 items. Normal requires the Beam Magnum, hard, the Sword Cannon, and the very hard, a Blaster Gun.
And this is the one that gets me Crimson Mode on very hard. And I could never find a Blaster Gun to give the quest giver in the dungeon, which would give me him. Yeah. Moving on.
This leaves the post-game dungeons, the first being Item Road, which is kind of a reward for beating the game's boss, as it's full of item boxes to fill up your inventory, only need to kick the boss's ass, and you get a free Digimon out of it in normal and hard. And lastly is the Cursed Dungeon, access from completing the other 7 at least once, and requires you to beat a dungeon overrun with the most powerful enemies in the game, before fighting one of the game's hardest bosses, Roto Knightmon. It gets worse on higher difficulties, as then her sisters join in. Do this, and you will be rewarded with Black War Greymon on hard, and Imperial Digimon Paladin mode on very hard.
I didn't specify many of the Digimon you get from this, as it varies from what Digimon you start as and what you get where. But Gallantmon, Black War Greymon, and Imperial Digimon Paladin mode do require those specific quests cleared on those difficulties to get them. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. There is no way out of here. It will be dark soon. There is no way out of here. There is no way out of here.
But as said before, unless you are really dedicated to playing as those Digimon, they're ultimately worthless due to the time you've already sunk into the game, with the initial character you chose and the effort you put in to raise them through completing the game the first time around. Anyways, Leomon's memory has recovered enough to give the clue that leads to a structure known as the Dreadnought,
which the game mislabels as the Dread Note. The fuck, yo?
Cause the Dreadnought is repeatedly described as a ship that moves around the digital world, which has currently found itself crashed in the Venom Swamp region.
Hell, the final dungeon on this stretch takes you to the bridge of the ship. It is called the Dread Bridge Dungeon. You are going to the bridge of the Dreadnought. Without the context that it's a ship, you lose understanding of why the dungeon, which doesn't have a bridge that people can cross to reach, would be named that.
As the name implies, the Venom Swamp is where you can very easily get afflicted with poison, so maxing out your supply of cure discs is essential. If you don't have a fire elemental attack, it gets more difficult to navigate as well, as these growths of, whatever the hell that is, can be destroyed by fire attacks. The first dungeon, Gecko Path, is found by going southeast from the entrance pad, down a set of stairs, and then to the northeastern side of this lower region. And this region is infested with Otamamon and Geckomon, which means, of course, one of the bosses would be Shogun Geckomon, who is present in this dungeon, the Gecko Path. Also, expect the Otamamon here to attack in swarms. After silencing the horrific singing voice of the Fat Man, head west this time from the entrance to the region to enter the mangrove forest, then immediately head north to reach the Vine Tunnel, and more Mecha Rogue 4s as the boss.
And while these dungeons are far easier to navigate than the last several, this is where that ends.
See, the next dungeon is much like Station X, and requires you to hunt down more switches and overworld lockouts for it to open, and you're given a little active clue to that. What you need to do is head back down to the lowlands area outside Gecko Path, and then flip a series of 7 switches while fighting the Otamamon and Geckomon that spawn on top of these plants that inflict you with poison. This is once more a task massively hindered by how bad the magic and ranged attacks are, as the only way you can disable the plant is to hit them from afar, as the plant's poisoning radius also triggers flinching until you're outside that range. And you can't do that until all the enemy Digimon are gone, and fighting them is likely to knock you into range of that attack. Not help that, several of the plants aren't visible on screen, only the attack radius. They are surrounded by destructible objects that will take your shot instead, or round bends in the environment you can't shoot straight at, and your only other option will not work if you've not gotten rid of every other threat to you.
And since poison takes multiple cure discs to heal, you're limited to 9 of them, and poison rapidly depletes your health by a constant percentage that increases as you level up, you're very likely to die flipping a bunch of switches. Not against any powerful enemy or mismanagement of enemy swarms, but simply a lack of an ability to get rid of a status infliction and the dilemma of losing your work if you gate back to get more. It's very frustrating.
After you finally get all 7 flipped, immediately after you enter the Mangrove Forest, there's a console to the north which opens the Vein Dungeon, which is found up a set of stairs on the eastern side of the higher platform in the starting area. Vein Dungeon is a 4-floor one, with a bunch of button puzzles complicating getting through it again, with at last Diaboromon as its end boss. With the 3 dungeon keys of this region, head to the far northwest side of the Mangrove Forest. It'll take you a while with the enemy swarms and poison plants, to a set of stairs and platform guarded by a Geckomon, who before all 3 keys were obtained would bar your way.
But before going, you need to go back to Metal Element's junk shop and purchase an equip item known as a filter board. What, did I forget to say that? Kind of because the game forgets to tell you that in advance.
If you don't, you will quickly die from traversing the poisonous river that is necessary to get to the Dreadnought. The filter board is the only item in the game that prevents this, and the game does not tell you this until after you've already tried to make your way through the river. The only other option is to waste all, literally all, of your healing items before you even reach the ship. When you do reach the ship, however, its outer defenses consist of a ridiculous amount of security cannons. Both of the paired small types, the large heavy turrets, and now ones that fire a frickin' wave motion gun!
And not just one, but several of them!
Fortunately, the walk up to the Dreadnought is a set of steps, so none of these attacks will hit you if you're on the step below them, but consequently, none of the attacks you do will hit anything that is not on the same plane of elevation as yourself, meaning you will need to move directly into the line of fire and be hit by the attack to even attack the turret.
Unless, that is, you obtained the last defensive attack spell, which is a bomb. On the starting Digimon, only Agumon and Guilmon can learn that.
As the turrets aren't dependent on damage levels to destroy, only the number of times they are hit, and the bomb hits 3 times in succession outside of the overlap window, so you can for the most part stay out of their range of attack that way, but it will gut your MP for doing so.
So finally we reach the bridge, and this is once again utter hell to navigate.
For this time, they made it so that the locked gates and puzzles you free up by hitting switches are not on just one floor. Oh no, that would be too easy. This is a 3-floor dungeon you must wander around without a clue to where you need to go to unlock the barred off regions, as different buttons that unlock other parts of it are sequestered behind locked doors on other floors or passages that require doing all 3 sections at once, and requires you to travel back and forth a dozen times.
And with how bad the loading screens are in this game, my best time literally takes me over an hour. So it should surprise no one that this personalized hell is all in lead up to facing Lucemon.
And Lucemon Shadow Lord mode is one of the hardest bosses in the game, simply because you aren't able to damage him until you destroy his Gehenna Sphere, which is made difficult in how he keeps his distance, can stagger your attacks with his own, and often flies off the field to carpet bomb the battle area for periods that last far longer than he spends on the ground. As the Gehenna is once again something that's cohesion is tied not to damage numbers, but the number of times you hit it, you once more need to switch to a gun and fire at him from a distance, then switch back to your melee weapon when the Gehenna dissipates, only for it to reform and start the whole thing over again, often before you've even depleted one of the 3 boss health bars. Meaning you are likely to be stuck here, just fighting him, for around 20 minutes. For the data discovered from the Dreadnought, the DSG discovers the true source of the outbreak, where the originator of the virus, Mecha Rogue X, likely is, said region being the Machine Pit. And it is just overrun with enemies throughout it, turrets assaulting everything, and it's just a mess to survive. Unlike the last 2 regions, the Machine Pit's dungeons aren't tedious to get to, just get through, as they imply many of the same lockouts of the previous ones, on top of reducing visibility of the dungeon, so you can no longer see the walls with which to find exits to rooms or any secret passages. The intent to either get you in close range to Raremon, who have a defense skill which will inflict the worst case of poison in the game, or to hide the spawning of Infamon, which can split itself to give you more enemies to fight, but don't award extra experience. Plus, these dungeons begin to have traps arranged, so they are fuck you traps, one that you are designed to walk blind into, that you will only be able to avoid if you remember where they are, and give no other indication of their existence. The Electromine also introduces slippery floors, which requires pinpoint navigation to avoid tripping all the stuff they put in those rooms to intentionally cause you harm.
Fortunately, as I have a tendency to overcorrect my movements in these kinds of games, due to how terrible the motor control in my hands is, I was ironically able to avoid the difficulty of those kinds of fields.
The second part of the Electromine also requires you to travel down tunnels and rooms possessing Trailmon tracks, and the Trailmon are invincible Digimon that will tear a chunk out of your HP if you are unlucky enough for them to hit you. But you're never quite sure how far down them you need to travel if you've not found the map for that floor. While the fight against Mecha Rogue 05 in the Mecha Nest isn't that bad, the Electromines also has more sections where you need to jump onto moving platforms. This time, they also feature trap laser guns that, if they hit you, will send you to your doom. But, after a slogging grind, you will eventually come to the second to last boss, Roto Knightmon.
And yes, the game does make allusions to the Royal Knights working with the Mecha Rogues to spread the X program as part of the context that informs that this is meant as a prequel to X Evolution.
Lee Sin explains in a way why we don't see her and her bunny Dynasmon, as they are eliminated, likely in the war that followed this. Once you get the keys, you can access this odd ship which sends us to the Mechanical Core region, containing the final dungeon. However, there's a specific way to open the core, and it requires you to only trigger certain switches which lower the platforms up to the core. On the bottom level, you need to hit 1 green and 1 red switch, lowering related platforms to higher platforms, and then you can only flip green switches to the remaining steps up to it. And while all that happens, you will be bombarded by attacks from Infamon that continue to multiply.
No joke, when I recorded footage for this, there were so many Infamon following me around that the gameplay slowed to a crawl because my PS2 could not process all of them. I've never seen a game that is so clearly designed to not even tax the capabilities of the console, and yet likewise push it to its limits with what's required to get past in order to do everything.
But if you've managed to make it all this way, congratulations. You have now reached the easiest dungeon in the game. All you need to do is flip the switches to move the platforms in place, and kill the Mecha Rogues and Imperial Dramon that spawn, the only difficulty being striking the Imperial Dramon as they fly around on the plane above you, so you need to fight them on these platforms. But due to the system quirks, when you're on these platforms, all your range attacks are not recognized as being on the same plane of attack as Imperial Dramon, so you can only damage these flying Digimon that attack from range with close range weapons. What a fucking surprise.
So finally, we have reached Mecha Rogue X, and it is a complete parallel to the Death X Dorumons.
The first one being the most swift attacker that revels in spawning duplicates of itself, actively mutating Mecha Rogue 4s into additional clones. And you do need to deal with the clones first, because if you defeat X while the clones are still on the field, it just transfers its data into one of the clones, which fully restores his health. As it specializes in attacks from all ranges, it's clearly meant to overwhelm any enemy. The second mode requires you to recognize the tells, as it releases a ring of poisonous gas which will poison you, and it's more or less invulnerable to damage while it has these drill bits expelled from its body, so more becomes a waiting game. Whereas the last, largest, and most powerful body that mirrors Death Xmon is a comparable wimp. Attack under its belly and around its side, and it becomes easily one of the easiest bosses in the game.
Not like that's saying much.
And with this done, you are the Rin Rare and have completed the game on the specified difficulty.
But you haven't saved the digital world. This, at the end of it, was a meaningless stand. Because Leomon from earlier, still infected with the X program.
Hell, some have theorized it's the same Leomon from the beginning of X Evolution, who dies not from his injuries, but his long-standing infection he finally succumbs to. That's why he needed Doraemon's X antibody, in order to live.
The Digimon on the Yamato server are still crazy, the X program still spreads and respawns, and will kill everyone. You and your Tojin Digimon, despite appearing to beat back this threat, do not ever matter.
And that's the ultimate problem here. Because the story is so absolutely bare bones, you aren't given a sense of accomplishment. You don't see how this conflict affected the world around you, or how it was any manner of important to anyone.
And that is why this game is awful. It is one of the worst stories I've ever seen for an RPG, as one that doesn't even give you a story or character to connect to, or really a world. The controls are frustrating, the dungeon's monotonous, the level grind exceedingly boring, and generally the gameplay is counterintuitive to having any fun.
And every Digimon game before and after it has done what it does better. World 2 has excellent dungeon questing. World 3 has better training services. World 1 has better real-time battles. All three have a better scope to their conflict, its costs and its rewards, far more diversity in party members and their customization. The stories are coherent, and none of them suffer from the load time nonsense.
The ironic thing about all this, however, is if you look at the ratings for the Digimon games, there is one that's considered even worse than World 4. And that is Digimon Data Squad Another Mission, released in 2007. And it's not! It's not even close!
Mainly because it builds off of the events of the Data Squad anime for its characterization. While you're limited to much of its stuff for gameplay and your Digimon choices, thus making it kind of dependent on your familiarity with that series for understanding the story nuances, each of them are allowed an elaborate evolution tree system so you're not stuck to just them, but can eventually get your favorites.
Hell, within the first few minutes of booting up, I was able to change Marcus's Agumon into Guilmon, and saw the full evolution tree for him and his eventual compatriots, to see what I need to achieve in their leveling to obtain those Digimon. And none of them were as elaborate, ridiculous, and time-consuming as the 16 total in World 4 for its unlock conditions.
And Another Mission follows the same guidelines for such that were established in Digimon World DS, Dusk, and Dawn, which completely revitalized such to a more refined and beloved dynamic that was first seen in Digimon World 3. Their dungeon and recruitment systems were an amalgamation of Digimon Worlds 1 and 2, those three games ultimately becoming the groundwork by which the following series' game success would find itself, and thus be refined in Data Squad and the DS games.
I have not gone all the way through Data Squad on Another Mission. I've only played the first few hours, but it is nowhere near as horrible, nor as long-lastingly caustic an experience that I have had with Digimon World 4. This game is the bottom of the barrel, and every major concept originating from it were rightfully abandoned.
Excellent. Now, is there anything else you might want to say before you're done?
Yes, actually. As I finished all of this, I came to realize that I have wasted my time.
Yes!
I have wasted my time in anger because it's not the worst game I've ever played or even reviewed.
What?
Yeah, I legitimately think the Fabula Nova Crystallis games are worse.
As bad as the localizations are here, they are the only reason for a lessening of coherence. It wasn't the material itself that refused to explain itself. While there was no direction on what to do, at least you were allowed to fucking explore. It did limit and restrict you to a hallway, or a specific character, or to keep to a fucking ridiculous timetable. It doesn't waste my time with a stupid story, as what story there is just facilitating going to the next level and fighting as a character intended to be reflective of ones that were fan favorites. And at no point did it force me to grind and grind and grind pointlessly. only for it to not actually matter with how the game kept the stakes against you no matter what you did. For, at the end of it, you still got the decision to choose what you do. I don't even hate Band of America, I just hate what it let itself become, ignoring its fans and actively alienating them, an intentional choice to gimmickize its products and throw money to horrible titles that go on to bite them, instead of creating quality materials.
I hate this game. I will always hate this game. But the anger's not there anymore.
No, that can't be!
Because that's what you were banking on, wasn't it? That I'd destroy myself with my own hatred and rage against it, and that let you out of here, right?
That's why you infected all my .hack games with it. So the series that is such a calming experience to me only reinforced the memories of anger I seek to escape from.
That's why you took my form, isn't it? To trick your prison to letting you out and leave me in your place. Because then it'd read me as you and let you slip free. Well, it didn't work, and you know why? Because this never became the standard. This was recognized for the failure that it was. And yes, it has its fans. All of these games have their fans, and they are free to enjoy them if it is an experience they get joy out of. As even at its worst, even with Daisuke Monomiya bringing ridicule to my birth name in the dub of 02, even with the terrible story of Cross Wars, and its even worse localization, I love Digimon, and I don't see myself ever stop.
Silence! Ow! I have seen your madness! Your anger at this stupid disco bites in programming! Why is it all good now?
It's quite simple. I got Crimson Mode.
What?
Yeah, I managed to get Crimson Mode, and he is fucking awesome even in this awful game.
But you said...
I was never able to get the blaster gun in the side quest. That doesn't mean I didn't figure out a way to bypass that.
As thanks to GameFAQs, I discovered I could get the gun from the item trader quest by going back to Normal's post-game, then kept that in my inventory for the quest in very hard mode. Boom! Instant Gallantmon.
And then I took it further. I got him his wings.
No!
Yeah, I took him through the Nume Nume boss rush. And it was the most cathartic experience I have ever had with this game. Because now I can say I did it. No one can accuse me of not getting it, or being ignorant to its content, or any of that crap. Because I did everything. And it's not an experience I would wish on anyone. But now, I never need to look at it again. My anger's gone, and my mind is clear. Because I did what I was never able to 11 years ago. And now, I am free.
No! You can't leave me here! This is not over. One way or another, I will get out of here!
We'll settle this next year.